So now it's time for the actual product demonstration of IBM Cognos FSR. And just a quick reminder, you do have a live chat panel box there. You can send questions directly to myself and comments for that matter as well. What I'm going to do is reserve some time at the end of the product demonstration, quickly consolidate and scan through the questions and comments that have been coming through and get you answers for those questions. So let's take a look at the actual application now. So for some of you, this might be your first look at Cognos FSR. And what I've gone ahead and done is actually selected a report, which happens to be a 10K in this example. And as soon as you select any report for that matter, you're going to see a similar home screen based upon your security profile and who you are as a user. Now up top here, what will be very similar right across all users will be the fact that you'll be able to see exactly what team you belong to, what perhaps document that you're working on right now as a team and collectively. And you're also going to be able to have some high-level visibility into how many days you have left in order to complete your submission or to meet your deadline internally for that matter. Over here on the right-hand side to help you better manage that process is the workflow engine that is built into Cognos FSR. This is an area where you can keep track of all the different tasks, all the different individuals, all the different groups that are working on their respective areas, pages, or sections for that matter, as it relates to your documents that you're putting into Cognos FSR. Now down below here, I've just highlighted here for you that a few different sections and pages, really just notes for that matter, that are going to have an exercise of XBRL tagging take place. Notice here though, just to the left of that end users to perform that task are actually going to be utilizing Microsoft Excel and Microsoft Word that are already going to be on your desktop. So what you're going to find is that Cognos FSR acts as a wrapper and an application framework around your existing tools that you're already familiar with. It makes the process for XBRL tagging and taxonomy management that much more straightforward and easy to do. Now over on the left-hand side, there's a number of different file formats that you're going to be able to produce, and some of those are going to be your Edgar filings, some of those are going to be your instance documents, and you're going to be able to preview that information. You're going to be able to log directly right onto Edgar and submit and self-file that information, and it's literally at a push of a button which output and which format you require, but Cognos FSR can deliver all of those formats that you actually require. Now thinking in terms of XBRL, just very quickly, there perhaps will be, for certain users that have XBRL responsibilities, this additional file menu for themselves. Whereas they'll be able to configure XBRL, which means we're going to associate your taxonomy, whether it be the base taxonomy, whether it be a pre-existing taxonomy that you're going to import into Cognos FSR, or it's one you're going to have to build from scratch. The idea is that we will associate your taxonomy, or taxonomies as it may be, with the application itself. You're going to be able to cache all of those taxonomies and use them as version control for your taxonomies and for the preparation of them and of the actual tagging exercises you go through. As I quickly mentioned, you are able to preview your instance document, you're able to build and generate your instance document and files, and at the same time, you're going to be able to run reports to view all tagging that has taken place. You're going to be able to also see other additional information, which I'll get into a little bit later on, around the presentation of information such as inline XBRL outputs, as well as making sure that you're conforming to all EFM validation rules and that your instance and taxonomy files are accurate and compliant. So all of this is right inside the actual application. There is no additional third-party software that you actually need to purchase to utilize with Cognos FSR. Now if we expand out this information here over to the left-hand side, I'm just going to actually see or expose out the tree, and in this case here I've chosen to break down my report very, very granular. Around XBRL and the exercise, you simply might choose to have this at a much more summary level, where you might have all of your notes requiring XBRL tags, you might have your balance sheet information, your income statement, cash flow, etc. in one section, and you might have all other remaining areas that simply do not require XBRL tagging removed or hidden for that matter from plain sight and view as you're moving through your XBRL tagging and taxonomy management exercises. Now, some of the outputs that I was mentioning beforehand literally are at a push of a button, and what you're able to then furthermore do is generate your instance document files. Again, this type of file is just that XML code that is required, that does get submitted. However, it doesn't provide much color or context for that matter for actual internal review. Where you're better off served with is actually utilizing either the SEC's previewer, where you can log on to this website specifically, and you can directly submit your information, and you're able to furthermore then preview what your filing would look like without actually doing an official filing. So this is an area where you can validate your information before you're actually moving through the submission process. There are additional other viewers out there as well. By all means, you could utilize those too. Now, in the case of actually submitting your file, Cognos FSR will generate all of the required files you need, and you'll be able to very easily move over to the Edgar website. You'll be able to log on with your pertinent information, and you'll be able to self-file should you choose to want to do that. If you still have a third party that's assisting with the actual filings themselves, then you could continue on doing that, and you would just simply pass the files over to them, which would have come from Cognos FSR. If you would like ourselves to do it, meaning the IBM Cognos family, we could also specifically assist you in that filing. So you have a lot of options essentially. Now, one of the additional options here that Cognos FSR does provide for you in terms of output, making that instance document look a little bit more colorful, literally, as you'll see here in a moment, but also just providing better insight, especially for reviews, whether they be senior level individuals who simply don't want to navigate through a document or want to see how their report actually looks very similar to their Edgar filing, very similar to a Word draft perhaps. This is an HTML format, which is actually XHTML format, which embeds the XBRL tags directly inside the HTML file itself. So this is an example where I can choose to highlight all of my tags, or some of them for that matter. I can hover over different areas of the document, and I can very quickly see all the information as it pertains, even things like parenthetical tagging or my footnotes, the number of shares, etc., all as it relates. And so as a senior level review person, or just as a person reviewing the document, it definitely makes that review process a lot easier, let's say. So just again, a couple high-level overviews and options there for you. Let's actually now turn our attention to how you would utilize the tagging application and how you would utilize the tagging concepts inside of Cognos FSR. So the first thing I'm just going to do is go down to where your first year requirement specifically would be for some of you, which is tagging the front side of your financials, as well as obviously the footnotes. But this is information that would need to carry forward regardless of whether it's your first filing, your second, third, fourth, etc. You do absolutely have to have this information tagged at all times. And there's going to be some benefits of doing it inside Cognos FSR, as you're going to see here in a moment. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to enable my XBRL. So as part of my toolbar, and as you're starting to see the application framework wrap around Excel, I also have the ability to interact with XBRL functionality right from the same window. I don't have to log in and out or go to a different application specifically. It's going to load up just as I would need it to, and as I would probably expect and want it to for that matter. So here's an example then. As I load up XBRL, I can take a look at basically the statement of financial position as part of my presentation link base. And I can quickly get to that information and see that all of my line items in this case are exact to all of my line items within my Excel area. Now, what I can furthermore do is I can notice here that a lot of this information has already been tagged in blue, or perhaps is coming through a little bit of a gray color for you today. The idea is that I can highlight all that information, and up top here in my middle pane, I can see exactly all of those tags specifically as it relates to my document in this case. So I can see all of the values for all of the different time periods, all of the different locations for both 2010, 2011, and in this case 2009. So the idea here is that this quickly can summarize for me all of my tags that are existent on this worksheet. So all of the tags are actually held in the centralized repository that is part of Cognos FSR. Now if I wanted to simply remove one of these tags here, I'll select marketable securities as an example, and I can remove that tag, and let's assume that this is a new line item, and I will actually create a new line item with you live here just in a moment. You'll be able to see that, and I'll sort of do it completely from the ground up. But for the time being, let's just assume that I had a new value, that I either had to replace a tag or that I wanted to, I just needed a tag for the very first time for that matter. So what I could do is I could navigate over here to the left-hand side of my screen. I would find all of my elements that I have as part of either the base taxonomy or as part of my extended taxonomy. And what I can now do is actually just say, well, let's go ahead and assign that value or that area with this tag. And it's key here to note that regardless of what value is actually sitting there, the value could be 25,000, the value could be 250,000, there may not actually even be a value there. The idea is that the tag will always stay with that cell and with that line item or location, regardless of what the number is and regardless of what that number is finalized at the time of your actual submission itself. So there really truly is a tag once approach with this technology. You tag your financials once, you tag your notes once, the respective line items, etc. And you can literally also roll that information forward to future periods. So you're only doing maintenance tagging in terms of new notes, in terms of new line items, etc. So as we take a look here, one of the other quite often, we'll call it a mistake or an oversight really, is the fact that many values themselves need to have a negated label associated with them. So as part of your taxonomy design, obviously we're going to set up things, and you would set up things, perhaps already do have negated labels created, but some of those values also need to have the negated signage effectively associated to it. So in this case here, it's very easy for us to actually go ahead and do that. It's a simple check, yes or no, is it a negated value or not? And you're able to move forward and, generally speaking, be more ready to actually conform and have less warnings or less errors that you may have had in the past. Now, as I take a look at some additional other information here, what I'm just going to do is pull up our taxonomy manager. I'm going to stay in the same section of this report. So in this case here, when I load up our taxonomy manager, you're going to see effectively a few different taxonomies. So you have the ability here to store multiple different taxonomies in multiple versions of your taxonomy, all part of the tool, so that you can utilize that from an audit trail standpoint, you can utilize that from a go-forward strategy standpoint, and also from a migration standpoint from earlier base taxonomies to current base taxonomies. 08 to 09, 09 to 11 would be a couple examples there for you. Now an example here specifically is that if I take a look at my 2009 taxonomy, I can go ahead and open that taxonomy up, and we'll start to see the real estate change ever so slightly, where the top pane again will be very specific to my taxonomy, and the left hand side very much so the same thing. Now in this case, what I'm expecting to see is that we actually have part of this already reading in our EFM rules reading as part of the application, the 2011 taxonomy. So what I can look at historically back is that there are or have been specific items that are actually deprecated in this case. Now that would present us with some warnings, with some errors specifically, and the system itself is literally doing real-time checks which can be refreshed. And when I say real-time checks, I mean real-time validations for your actual taxonomies themselves. So they're going to give us certain warnings and certain error messages, and the idea here is that certain messages will require us and present us with other options. So this gives us an example of this deprecated item, and it gives us a few options as to what we could replace it with. So whether we want to replace it with one of our extensions, one of the other base elements within the taxonomy, we're going to have basically our hands held and direct us into the appropriate replacement for those exercises as an example. So what I could also furthermore do then is just simply search and say in this case, well, let me go ahead and create a brand new extension or a new element if it was appropriate. Or I could just say, let's go ahead and search, or utilize one of the pick list examples we saw a moment ago. And I can simply view the information, view the properties of this area, directly inside my taxonomy and say, well, what does this mean? It's reading from the US GAAP element here, telling me exactly what the documentation and what that label happens to be. I can determine that that's the most appropriate, and it's a simple click or double click there, and automatically it replaces that item. I am no longer looking at or having a deprecated item as part of this taxonomy and as part of this relationship group specifically. So what I could now do is also continue to look through other areas specifically where I can see some of my standard labels should correspond to its name. I see some other areas or other warnings around abstract elements. And so they're very helpful items. And another common example would have been around oftentimes an income statement was never set or a balance sheet was never set specifically as part of the taxonomy. These are some of the things that very often have taken you time, especially in an outsourced mode, to be able to review and then wait to get the taxonomy back as a new update, and then you're spending additional time reviewing. If you had the tools available to make those changes with the knowledge right away, which you have the knowledge to do, then you'll be able to do that much more quicker and get these things turned around and really be more so in control of your timelines overall. So I'm just going to actually navigate to a different area now to talk through a different level of tagging, and this would be dimensional based tagging. And so the idea here I'm going to use is the property, plant, and equipment footnote. And once more, I'm going to enable XBRL. So in this case here, I can navigate and change my presentation link base to my capital assets area. And I can expose out the information. I can see the detailed line items that would be appropriate and that are part of my taxonomy here today. But I can also furthermore take a look at the dimensionality aspects of the actual tags themselves. So here I can see a detailed tag, and at the same time I can bring up my dimensions, and I can see that the axis itself has actually been tagged as well. So you find an example like this, you find maybe a fair value disclosure footnote as well, gets quite extensive and quite detailed. There are many other examples as well, but the idea here is that this technology supports all levels 1 through 4 and everything in between, obviously, with combinations and with much more advanced tagging than simply your first and second year requirements. There's always going to be a little bit more advanced level tagging than quite oftentimes you hear about. Now, as an example goes, or as just continuing on through here as well, I'm just going to take a look at my inventory area. So we've taken a look at 2 examples within Excel, but quite oftentimes other tools out there only allow you to tag specifically either in Excel or in Word. And quite oftentimes you have to wait for your final report to actually be completed. With Cognos FSR, that is not the case. You are able to begin your tagging exercise much further downstream or upstream, whichever way you want to look at that. And the idea here, as I change my link base once more, to be able to expose out and be able to see a couple things here with you. This is Excel again, as I've pointed out, but I'm just going to highlight all of my information once again. And so with those highlights here, we can see once again everything is neatly organized, quite visible in that top pane. And we can organize that information by element, by location in Excel, by time period, the unit, the scale, etc. Now, quite oftentimes what actually does happen is that your balance sheet will change, your notes will change, and the line items that will correspond will also change. So what I'm going to go ahead and do here is insert a new example or a new line item, just as I would in Excel. And I'm going to call this new other inventory as an example here. So the idea here is that I now would like to or need to put that within my taxonomy, as well as make the appropriate label, create the proper element for it, etc., and make it available so that I can apply tags to the future values that will appear here within this table. So I'm going to commit those changes. I'm just going to save that information in terms of having the line item there. That would create an audit trail, a record of those changes actually taking place by user with a date stamp, a time stamp, etc. And now what I'm actually going to do is talk through a little bit more of our taxonomy management as we look to incorporate that line item in our taxonomy here. So the idea that I can actually go through is actually to say, well, we do support multiple different taxonomies, and you will actually go through a migration process that will likely have you utilize your 2009 taxonomy, and move that forward to 2011 as an example. You may have had your taxonomy created by your financial printer or with some outside assistance as an example. We'll be able to literally import in that taxonomy and then do the migration for you should that actually be required. So what you end up with is you'll end up with probably a middle tier or an additional version of your taxonomy, which will actually be part of the migration. So in this case here, you'll be able to select what your period is, and you'll be able to only build your new updated extension or base taxonomy here with the US GAAP 2011, if that's the only option essentially at the point in time of you utilizing this software. Now the idea here is that afterwards, once you do that, you can imagine that you will still have some warnings, some areas, whether they be deprecated items, whether they be label issues, etc., that will be present with the later version of the taxonomy and with the base extensions themselves. So the idea here is that after going through and correcting those issues and performing a little bit of maintenance, you would be able to then utilize and have a 2011 taxonomy essentially, and perform all of your additional tagging. And this is where I'm just going to go ahead and open up that taxonomy, and I'm going to be able to, in this case, add on that additional new line item to my taxonomy, make it available as an additional element, and actually then utilize and do all the XBRL tagging still inside Cognos FSR. So the idea here, keep in mind again, is there are not additional tools. Everything I am doing is Excel-centric, is Word-centric, which I will show you just in a little bit as well. And once again, there's a wrapper around those existing tools. So the learning curve with this application is very, very minimal. It's literally measured in hours due to the fact that you really are the experts of your information already. You understand your files themselves. And in this case here, as I take a look at my relationship group, I can navigate down and I can find the area of my inventory note detail, and I'll be able to expose out what I currently have existent within my tree. Now, what I would likely want to do is lock that information out. So now I have control of this area of the taxonomy, and you may have someone else who's in the taxonomy doing similar maintenance tasks as well. But I'm going to go ahead and actually add on a new child here, and it's automatically going to pull forward from my Excel spreadsheet this new line item. And in this case here, I'm going to search for other inventory. Now you can call your elements anything you like as you create an extension or need to for that matter. I'm just going to simply search US GAAP elements right now from the base taxonomy. And here it brings up some examples, and once again I'm able to show the properties of this information. I can quickly hover over and read what the actual documentation label happens to be, and I can determine whether this is the appropriate element that I would like to utilize for tagging purposes here. So let's assume that I have determined that exactly is what I would like. I can once again just double click on that line item, and it's automatically going to add that in on the left hand side of my tree here. It's automatically going to bring over and pull over my label, and I'm going to leave this check mark checked here, which means any future changes to my Excel line item when the time comes when I no longer have an actual item called new other inventory perhaps, it will automatically update the label and actually update the taxonomy and the base element, including all of the tags that may have had the old naming convention as I move through the actual tagging process as well. So this is a significant time savings compared to utilizing an outsourced model, as well as just being able to be in complete control, as I've mentioned a few times, of your own timeline specifically. So in this case here, I'm actually going to generate that taxonomy file. This will remind me, and this will check back in any relationship groups that I may have checked out, which obviously I had just here. And the idea is that now the system will not only save my taxonomy, it's going to save it to the central repository, it's going to update the database area, it's also going to run through its own generation and validation checks at the same time too. So I will get a few confirmations here, one telling me that the taxonomy has been saved, and the second is going to tell me that my taxonomy has no errors, or at least I'm expecting it to tell me that it has no errors. At that time, once it is error-free, I would be able to move forward and continue on with my tagging exercise. So as you can see, it is very easy to be able to manage the taxonomy itself, and there are other tools that make this look, very much so quite similar. I wouldn't and don't believe they're as easy to utilize, but at the same time, there is a control process that you would want to put around this, meaning you will only want to have certain users be able to generate and update the database and actually save these types of files, just from a version control standpoint and from a process flow standpoint. So rather than having anyone be able to get access to it, which certain tools unfortunately act that way, you have the ability here to more so put process and control around the taxonomy management portion. So again, there's a few things here that have taken place as well. When I selected over here on the left-hand side of my tree a US GAAP element, automatically the system is smart enough and is going to lock us out from making certain mistakes. It will actually refrain myself from making any changes to the balance or the period type, the type in general. And the reason for that is because they've already been explicitly defined with those characteristics in the base taxonomy. If I were to choose an extension or create an extension, and here we just see that my confirmation message is successful with no errors, and my taxonomy is valid, and the generation has been completed. Now, when we do create a base, an extension to the base elements, you will have an option and obviously a need to be able to change this information. So there's definitely things that drive you and drive the end user in certain directions to make it so you are not making mistakes in the actual process itself. Now, I'm going to return back over here to the same object. I'm going to enable now my XBRL. I'll call up my new updated version from the repository that is now my 2011 taxonomy, or the slight update to that taxonomy. And I'm expecting to see here that I now have an available option, an element, which I never had before, called New Other Inventory. And I'll be able to find that in my presentation area, and here it is down below. So that is great for me. It's very quick. Here it has the default time period specifically, and I'm able to then move over whether there's a value there or not, and begin to tag, as we saw earlier on, my information with that cell. And it here tells me, well, there's my other inventory, here's my display area, the time period, the unit, and the scale, etc. So very quickly I've been able to make a small change. The idea here is that this would be an example of some of the ongoing maintenance that you would move forward to and move through in terms of utilizing the technology for future reporting periods. Now keep in mind, however, though, we are going to be able to update and pre-tag all of your other areas, though, for you. So in this case, when I choose to roll forward this report, all of my column headers and values would literally be picked up and moved over, and all of these tags would stay in place, updating the corresponding time frame, however. So we will pre-tag literally your complete and entire report for you. It now just simply becomes a very one-off maintenance exercise that you would be going through. But again, you have complete control of when you're doing that, the beginning of your process, midstream, at the end, combinations of all of those specifically. So I'm just going to exit out of this area here for a moment, and I did mention that other tools out there will only allow you to do and perform tagging either in Excel environments and or only in Word environments. With Cognos FSR, you have the best of both worlds. So in this case here, I can move over to that inventory area. I can highlight once again my XBRL area. I'm already in my inventory node area where I want to be. And I'm able to quickly as well, even in Word, highlight all of my tags that I have. So in this case here, I see I have my disclosure text block tag. I can navigate to the next one, and I can see I have more so of a detailed note tag here at the same time. And this is an example of one of our label variables, which make for a more efficient tagging process as well. Whereas even when numbers change when they're embedded in narrative, in paragraphs of information or across different pages, automatically we can tag a location and a label, and that will pick up all those values and all the appropriate tags, once again, regardless of how many changes are actually taking place to the actual numbers themselves. So the idea here is that you can tag in both Word and Excel, and you can tag overall at any point of the process that you would like to choose and that you would choose as part of making your way through your own workflow or your own report compilation, etc. So just taking a look at the time, I realize I'm very close there and pretty much right up against the window here of our time that we have allotted here today. Obviously, I have not been able to get through all of the functionality and the level of detail that you likely do require. But definitely here, I just want to quickly recap a few things with you and then answer some of your questions and then also talk through some additional steps perhaps that you might want to undertake with ourselves. So the idea here is that, again, we can tell you all the great things about the product all day long, but the idea is that it's really great when the analysts come out with recommendations and once again do state that IBM Cognos FSR is the market leader in terms of XBRL and report automation. So they came out with a report even back in 2009 that stated these are some of their critical recommendations. And in this case here, some of the ones I've highlighted with you today were around integration to source data with real-time feeds of information, multi-author environments with collaboration, all the XBRL capabilities to be able to generate, validate, manage your taxonomies and complete all of your tagging requirements, have the workflow and the audit trails along with security, have a process monitoring dashboard, along with many other output options that you can have as part and parcel of the overall solution too. Now, some of the overall core business benefits of Cognos FSR are around reducing risks, reducing personnel costs, reducing audit costs in many instances, with and from a lot of the features that are inherent with Cognos FSR. Now, additional ones might be around reduced cycle time. I referred to it as you being in complete control of your timelines a number of times today, as well as improving your overall business insight. And once again, we can say many great things about the tool, but here are some real-world examples from some of our clients talking around, 4 of those key areas, which is reducing personnel costs. We've created and filed our 10Q already with IBM Cognos FSR, and it really reduced our workloads. Another one around lowering external costs, and specifically to do with XBRL. Much more cost effective than outsourcing the tagging and formatting to a printer, especially when it comes time for the detailed tagging of footnotes to our filings. Other examples are around reducing risk and reducing cycle time as well. So greater control, version control, workflow, and audit trail capabilities, and just simply the ability to quickly turn around additional reports, whether they be XBRL or other, in a very timely manner. So it's a nice surprise to be able to use FSR for report automation when sometimes the initial focus might be simply on XBRL and XBRL tagging.